Hello, everybody, and welcome to This Week in Villanova Football. What a week it was. This Week in Villanova Football is sponsored in part by the American Academy of Hospital Medicine, advancing the cause of excellence in hospital medicine. Studio 042, Super Business Printer, Studio042.com. And by Athletes Squared, a platform that lowers the cost of youth sports training and empowers all college athletes to monetize their name, image, and likeness. Go to info at athletesquared.co. Mark, there have been big wins we followed with this team this year. Marc Narducci, of course, joining us. This one, I think, would have to be the biggest. What a tremendous football game to watch. Certainly a tremendous ending for Villanova. One that I think we knew going in what the implications were. They went on the road in a tough place against, despite the record, a tough football team. And it was a game where we, as expected, saw some punching, counter punching, so to speak. The Cats never wavered. They got the lead in the third, and lo and behold, they're in a first place tie now in the conference.
And I thought it was a must win, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. But just some great individual plays. That 69-yard bomb, the Pringle, Ed, that looked like an NFL play to me. When I looked at Pringle, and he caught that ball at about the New Hampshire 35, and just he was off. I mean, and so many good plays. Watkins, on that deceptive TD run, on a quarterback draw. I mean, Jalen Jackson not even getting touched going on the outside. I mean, the highlights were incredible. And it's certainly one of their best wins of the year, especially on the road. And what that does, Ed, that knocked New Hampshire out. Goodbye. That
And
knocked
that
them out.
Yeah, that's saying something considering A, what we thought New Hampshire would be at the beginning of the season, and B, despite the fact that New Hampshire is where it is, I think people were still worried about those Wildcats, especially considering what we
Yeah.
saw going in. They were still a very dangerous team. So, yes, it was a knockout of New Hampshire. So it works both ways. It puts Nova in a good position. And one of the two favorites, the other one as well, are both out now in the CAA.
You would think William and Mary's out as well. You're right. I mean, it's really going to be interesting. Now, I've got to give a shout out, Ed. There's a group on Twitter/X called at Nova FB Club, and they are great supporters of this podcast. They retweet it, and they've been tremendous. But we had a little disagreement. I suggested this was a must game against New Hampshire. They weren't quite so sure about it. I I thought Villanova had to win because now they're at 7 wins, and I still think they need to get to 8. To be honest with you, I think I think if they lose their last two, they could get in, but I'm not so sure. So I think Towson again is a must win for them as well. But I thought New Hampshire was a must win for that reason. Our friend Sam Herder from HeroSports.com said there could be some 7-4 teams left out in the dust, and I definitely think you're going to see that this year in the FCS playoffs.
No, I think you're right. I think that's part of the factor why Sam was talking about why it was a must win, because there are so many teams in the mix. And for Villanova, I mean, it was a back and forth first half. The lead changed a few times. The Cats finally went up 31-27. After that, they didn't fall behind. By the way, the first win over New Hampshire since the 2009 playoffs, very impressive. A lot of individual stars. Want to mention one of them, Jalen Jackson, 145 yards and 2 touchdowns. We talked about the depth Villanova has. Get a more experienced guy come in there. He gets 145 yards in the biggest game. And, Villanova, I think, obviously ran the ball very well. They had big plays in the passing game when they needed it. But, again, that balance and that depth was a big reason why in a game like this, Villanova was able to come out on top.
And Ed, remember the play where Jackson broke for a really long run and he tripped? He tripped at like the 30, or he would have had like 175 yards or 180 yards. And because they weren't going to get him. He just tripped. So it was just a really impressive performance by him. He missed a little bit of time earlier in the year, but he looks in form. And Mark Ferrante on the conference call today was asked about, hey, you like that balance, but Jackson got a lot of work. When you have a hot hand like that, you don't want to go away from it.
Right. That's the factor is you can have that depth, but if somebody's really going well, if it's working, you don't want to stop until it stops working. And fortunately for Villanova, it didn't. Mark, we were half right about something last week. We talked about turnovers being such a key. Why? Because this New Hampshire team has put it on the ground a lot this year, 17 fumbles, but their quarterback, Max Brosmer, he only has one interception. So if they're going to get the ball, it's going to be on fumbles. Well, the turnover battle did go Villanova's way with the Cats forcing 4 turnovers, but as we mentioned, a quarterback who threw only 1 interception the whole season coming into this game threw 3. A remarkable job all around, really, to have one of the top quarterbacks in the CAA go to the wrong guy 3 times in one game.
Yeah, I mean that's the key. The turnovers and everything to be able to get outdo them 4-1 on that. I mean, again, that shows what the defense is doing. They're getting a better pass rush, and they're being very, very optimistic. I can't even talk today. But anyway,
you're so excited about the win. I know.
Ed, two things though. Big plays. They gave up that 87-yard kickoff return to Khalib, which was a great return, by the way. And Luby had that 75-yard run early on. After that, they did an okay job against him. I know he scored from short distance later on. But, you can't have a perfect game. But if you want to work on something and take something out of a victory, you want to maybe watch those big plays.
Yeah, I could watch Villanova, New Hampshire every year. I know it's not easy for the fans the way it went, but it was certainly, again, it was great FCS football. And we talked about standouts. Let's not forget there were a lot on defense. The one that certainly stands out is Brendan Bell. 12 tackles, 1 forced fumble, 1 interception. That's quite a day for that young man. He really was a presence throughout this game. Sometimes he's getting pressure. Sometimes he's dropping back. Sometimes he's stopping the run. For Bell, in a season where there have been so many standouts on defense, that might have been one of the best performances of the season.
There's no question. And I don't think there's any question he's going to be a first-team All-CAA choice. One thing I learned today, you learn something new when you get on these conference calls. Did you know he was originally a walk-on? He came to Villanova as a walk-on. But
kind of worked out well, yeah.
After 1 year, Mark Ferrante said, we saw his potential and we put him on scholarship. But that, it goes to show you, untapped talent that you find here. And now he's one of the most dominant players in one of the most dominant leagues around.
And a game that went back and forth. We mentioned Villanova took the lead. The Watkins to Pringle long touchdown pass really put the game away.
Yeah.
Connor Watkins threw for under 200 yards. We've had some games this year where he's thrown a ton of big plays, or has thrown and made a ton of big plays. Didn't have to do as many in this game, largely because they were running the ball well, but it just seems like, okay, time for a knockout blow here. And again, that was a gorgeous play to watch. Again, showing off the balance Villanova has with his receivers. That was the play that I think you could just get a sense it was in a game that was going back and forth. Not only did it make it a 2-score game, but I think there was a sense right there you could finally maybe breathe a little sigh of relief.
Yeah, it was. To me, it's one of my favorite plays all season that I saw there. It was just great, and that's the great thing about Villanova. They don't have to force the passing game on you. The rushing game was working. I think they ran for 248, and the other thing is, they averaged 6.2 yards per carry. Remember we said, run the ball a little bit on this New Hampshire team. You might want to eat up a little clock. You may want to do that. Well, it kind of worked. And by the way, the other thing we were half right about, we did say the Wildcats would win this game.
Yeah. Well, we knew the Wildcats could lose this game too, so I kind of think it balances out a little bit.
Right.
But, Mark, we kind of touched on this throughout this whole discussion of this game. This is great resiliency by this Villanova team. You're going into a hostile environment. That's a tough place to win, and that's a compliment to New Hampshire, how good they've been at home. It's going to be a game where there's going to be big plays against you. You hope that's not going to be the case. You hope they're limited. We saw that, and each time, there's a mental resiliency here for a team in a game with so much on the line, far away from home. We talked about this last week. It's been a long bus ride up to New Hampshire, and they were able to overcome that. I've been really impressed just with the mental aspect of this Villanova team. They don't get rattled. They get back to business. They needed to in this game, and they come away with the biggest win of the year.
Yeah, and this was a good game. They get down, they go back, they back and forth. So it was good. And I want to mention one other play. The 18-yard touchdown pass from Watkins to TD Iodoro Jai. That was on a wheel route. You and I were as close to him as the New Hampshire defenders were. It was just a great, well-designed play. And that there were so many of them in this game. But I and uh Iodor Ajayi as a receiver out of the backfield. I mean, he's a good runner, don't get me wrong, but man, is he a major threat there. It's just another weapon. But that was my second favorite play of the game next to the Pringle bomb, the 68-yard bomb.
Well, we alluded to the huge implications this has for the FCS playoffs. Yourself, Samuel, agreed that they really needed this one and probably still needed at least one more. This was one of the biggest ones, though, to put in their back pocket. But also the implications for the CAA, because lo and behold, there are no
Yeah.
more unbeatens in the CAA. Let's take a little look around the conference, see how this affects Villanova. A little bit of surprise, to say the least, only because Delaware had been playing so well. They get knocked off this past week, so everybody's got at least one loss in the conference. The Blue Hens lost a game against an Elon team, which is another one of those teams, a team that Villanova beat. You look at Elon, and of course, Albany's having a great year. All these teams, Richmond, that were kind of there. Could one of them take that next step and beat one of the teams above them? That's what happened. A really good football game, 33-27. And now, Mark, get out your calculators. Get out your calculators on your phone. Check out all the tie-breaking scenarios. It is going to be a wild finish. That certainly was I think, along with the Villanova win, one of the three biggest notes of the conference this week.
Ed, no question. There are five teams tied for first at 5-1. I mean, that's amazing balance. Uh, Five teams tied at 5-1: Delaware, Villanova, Albany, Richmond, and Elon. Now, Albany has beaten Villanova, but they lost to New Hampshire, who Villanova beat. You can go back and forth with all this stuff. So it's very, very interesting. Richmond, Elon this week. One of those teams is going to fall to 5-2. So that's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, we're looking at it right now. Among the last 2 weeks, you mentioned you've got Elon and Richmond playing this week, and of course we have Villanova, Delaware in 2 weeks. So at least two of those four teams are going to have at least two losses. Obviously, when they go head to head, that's going to shake things out a little bit, depending on how everybody else does. Another game I want to mention, Mark, Albany knocking off William and Mary. It's kind of like what Villanova did to New Hampshire. You alluded to William and Mary being one of the top teams, and boy, what a year for the Great Danes! Certainly a
Yeah.
lot of respect to the only team that's beaten Villanova in the conference this year. They just keep getting big win after big win. That helps set up this crazy scenario. So let's face it, William and Mary, New Hampshire are pretty good football teams. They're pretty much out of the conference race. One of them are out of the conference race at this point,
Yeah.
barring some insanity. So it shows you how good this conference is, and the fact that there are five teams ahead of them. Well, you want to predict the last couple of weeks? Go right ahead. I'm staying away from that, just taking things week to week, because it is going to be a frantic finish in this
Oh,
conference.
one thing I'm going to predict: Albany, and this is not exactly going out on a limb. Albany is going to make the playoffs because their final two games, Ed, are Stony Brook and Monmouth. Now, Monmouth's been a competitive team. We know Stony Brook has struggled. You figure the Great Danes will win at least one out of two. I think 8 wins get you there. They're 7-3, so I think that they're going to be in. Delaware's just about in. Although they play a Campbell team that's 500 in the CAA, so who knows?
And again, Villanova still has to play Delaware at the end of the year, in case anybody who's been a Villanova fan ever knew that, in addition to this game. So you've got the two head-to-heads, Elon, Richmond, Villanova, Delaware. Delaware, as you mentioned, also has to play Campbell. In the last week of the season, Richmond goes to William and Mary, which we know will not be an easy task. So if they were to beat Elon, then they still have another tough game. They probably have the toughest last two games combined. Elon still has
Yeah.
Hampton at home. Albany, as you mentioned, will host Monmouth. Monmouth blew out Stony Brook this week, 56-17. And as you mentioned, they've been competitive. So it's a 1 week at a time thing. It is eventually going to shake out. Obviously, if any one of these run the table, they'll get at least a tie in the conference and put themselves, certainly Delaware, Villanova, and Albany, in a great position as far as the FCS playoffs. So you like to see these head-to-head matchups to help things shake out. Right now, here's the other thing, Mark. Not only are there five teams at 5-1 of the conference, we mentioned William and Mary pretty much being out, New Hampshire out at 2-4. Those five teams, they have a 2-game lead over the rest of the pack. William and Mary, we mentioned. Rhode Island, who we thought coming into this year could be a
Right.
contender, they're 3-3. Monmouth, we alluded to, they're 3-3. This Towson team, which we'll get to, also 3-3. So there's a little bit of separation now, even though there are a lot of teams at the top.
Yeah, you know what's interesting about this league? Five teams are 5-1, and six are 3-3. I mean, there's a lot of parity there.
That includes the two favorites at three. Well, one of them at 3-3. New Hampshire's 2-4 now in the conference.
That's right, right.
So it does show how strong this conference is. And again, how, as Sam alluded to, you probably need 8 wins to feel comfortable. And I think, Mark, the other side of this is for the teams that do get in, they're going to look at Albany's resume and see who Albany beat. And they're going to see they beat teams like Villanova. They're going to look at Villanova's resume and see they beat a team like New Hampshire, like Elon, who's in the mix of this too. When you're beating these other strong teams, it certainly, I think, is going to help if you get in, possibly where you go. I know right now the last thing, if Mark Ferrani's watching, he's shaking his fist at me. The last thing you want to do is talk about potential seedings if you get into the tournament. That's still 2 weeks away. But I think when you come from a conference like this with an impressive record, it's only going
By the
to
way,
build your resume as far as where you go.
that's Nikko behind me.
Hello, it's the pet show. Mine, my doggy right there is me.
Nah, come on, Nikko.
There's Ty over here. So now, that has been the pet portion of our show. Ty's a little more laid back as long as he doesn't see Nikko, by the way. So, but yeah, getting back, let's pause Wild Kingdom for a second here. Let's get back to what we were alluding to. Yeah, Mark, I think the resumes for these teams help, but you beat a lot of these teams.
Yeah,
I think that's it. Again, Villanova doesn't want to think about the playoffs yet, but it's only going to help when you get to that stage.
I still think in the back of their minds they're thinking, how many wins and all that. And Delaware, even with the loss, is still highly regarded, still ranked in the top 10 in the FCS, two major FCS polls. So the Blue Hens they're just about in, but I mean, if they lost to Campbell and Villanova, I don't know, we'll have to see.
I think if they beat Campbell and would lose
Right.
to the Cats, they goes, well, they lost to another good team, Villanova. I think if Delaware wins this week, they're in. I think Villanova wins this week, they're in.
Right.
And I think Albany's in excellent shape, as you mentioned, with their schedule. I think you're going to get at least 3. But perfect segue. Let's kind of take a look ahead now to this week. Let's not take anything for granted if you're a Villanova fan. Towson comes in at 4-5. One of those losses was to Maryland. Again, there's your FBS game. They're 3-3 in the conference, and you'd think New Hampshire and William and Mary weren't that good, but it's worth pointing out when a team has wins over New Hampshire and William and Mary, it's pretty impressive to put on a resume for Towson this season.
How about Towson? They gave up 51 points against New Hampshire, and they still won the game, 54-51. I mean, that's pretty wild.
If they're the kind of team that certainly and Villanova, I don't think will do this. They haven't done this all year. You can't take them lightly. You look at this team again. You alluded to that 54-51 game. Their average giving up 32 points per game, but that was inflated a little bit with that one game. Again, they've proven they can play with some good teams in this conference. They have a couple of wins in this conference. They're at the 500 mark in the league, which, as you alluded to before, is not too bad considering all the parity and all the good teams. They have quarterback Nathan Kent with 13 touchdown passes as opposed to only 6 interceptions. So on the other side of the ball, this is the team that can put some points up on the board as well.
Yeah, and here's another thing. If Villanova fans are getting overconfident, right? This team lost to New Albany 24-17. Remember what Villanova lost to them by? It was 31-10. So I mean, all you have to do is kind of see some comparative scores and say this is not a gimme. It's definitely not going to be a gimme for Villanova. I asked Mark Ferrani today about your fear of a letdown. He says, we take them one at a time, and we don't think we're going to have a letdown. But man, that was such a big win, Ed. You don't know how human nature goes. Now, I think Villanova is going to win this game, but like I said, I don't think it's going to be a layup.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, Mark. Yeah, I don't think the issue of a letdown is anything to do with Villanova not respecting Towson, focusing on what's going to be a very tough game. Between what the coaching staff has done this year and the right mentality this team has had, they don't strike me as a team that's going to say, okay, we got through New Hampshire, Delaware's on the rise, the old proverbial trap game we talked about earlier in the year. That's just not the way this team is made up. They do have that 1 week at a time mentality. As you said, it's the other side of it. We might remember early in the year when Villanova beat Rhode Island at home. It was a convincing win, 35-9. it was a big win at the time. Rhode Island was ranked 17th. A lot of people felt the Rams were going to be right there down the stretch. And then they had to make that trip to Albany. And of course, we know what happened there, 31-10. On the other side, the plus side of this is they're not taking a bus ride to Albany this time. They're going to be home. I think that may help. And I think we're at a stage of the season now. We know Villanova's not going to overlook Towson, but I've seen enough. I think we've seen enough of this bunch. They're not going to lose their focus. And I think there'll be no looking ahead to Delaware. There'll be no basking in the glow of New Hampshire. And Mark, that depth, if you want to talk about maybe some guys are a little out of gas after what happened, they have enough players who can make up for that.
That's a good point, Ed. Couple things. First of all, you talked about Nathan Kent, the quarterback. He's a guy that hardly played his first couple of years. Now, in these days, kids that do that, they want to transfer out. So I asked the coach Pete Shinnick, how's he developed? He said he's developed great. He said he's much better from the opening game against Maryland than he is now. You gave his passing numbers, Ed, but he's also averaged 4.1 yards per carry. He's run for 277 yards and 3 touchdowns. And coach said, we're starting to do more design runs for him and things like that. So I'm not saying he's a major dual threat guy, but you can't forget the running game with him. He's a guy that's getting better. And number 15 is certainly going to be an interesting part of this game.
And they have some balance too on the offensive side. They don't have maybe a running back that stands out as one of the league leaders, but they have a bunch of guys who can run the ball, a bunch of guys who can catch the ball. And if you look at these games this season, you alluded to the lost Albany only by a touchdown, winning the games against New Hampshire, William Mary. This is a team that it's an old expression, but it's true. They play hard every week. They're going to come to play at Villanova this weekend. The Cats will have to be at the top of their game to win this one. And Mark, from Towson, you're winding down the season. Let's look at their perspective. You have a chance to take on a ranked team, one of the top teams, and kind of spoil their season. I'm sure that factors into it a little bit as well for them.
Yeah, and the other thing I was impressed with, they have three guys with 4 or more sacks. So they don't have one of these double-digit sack guys, but they have some people to do it, including a graduate student, Jesus Gibbs, who's 6'4", 275. Started his career at South Carolina. Was only there for a semester. Didn't play there, but he's had a heck of a season and a heck of a career there. So, I mean, these are going to be people to look for. You talk about the balanced running game. They have a guy named Devin Matthews, number 3. He's run for 571 yards, averaging 4.5 a carry and 9 touchdowns. Again, you look at the numbers, they may not be spectacular, but they're pretty darn solid. And I think that's what this team is, a solid team. And really one with nothing to lose, Ed. And they're the kind of teams that you don't always like to go up against.
Again, I like that expression, nothing to lose, because there are some teams in Townsend's position where you kind of know the season's slipping away. I'm not saying you don't come to play, but maybe there's not as much juice in the tank. Not with this team. They will come to play. They will play hard, and they'd love to play the role of spoiler.
Yeah, they really do. So just another fascinating week it should be in the CAA, Ed.
Well, Mark, we'll do a little scoreboard watching this week, particularly with the one head-to-head matchup that affects the top of the conference and some of the other teams. Of course, for Villanova, 1 o'clock kickoff against Towson at home, last home game. And we know there's one more game on the horizon, which the coaches don't want to talk about. We'll talk a lot about next week. When we return next week, we'll recap Towson. We'll get ready for the Battle of the Blue, Villanova, Delaware, which could be even bigger this year than it has been. I don't want to say in quite some time, but at least certainly bigger than last year. It would be a dramatic way to finish the season. But as we mentioned, Villanova, the focus is 1 week at a time. Mark, thank you as always. Thanks to our pets for making cameos this week. They're always welcome back as well, as long as the dog and cat aren't in the same room. We'll be back here next week. We'll talk about Towson. We'll look at the Delaware. Mark, hey, it's the fun time of year right now, and it's going to be an interesting finish.
And it should be great. Thanks again. We'll talk next week.